Welcome everyone to Oberlin Stage Left. Today we are having lunch with Rhiannon Giddens. I am Jan Miyake. I'm Associate Professor of Music Theory here at Oberlin. I'm also an alum. I play the banjo, I use the piano for teaching, and I was originally trained as a violist. I am absolutely delighted to introduce to you Rhiannon Giddens. Rhiannon is also an Oberlin graduate. She's class of 2000 and she has countless accolades. She's fairly impossible to pin down in terms of Rhiannon is a bluegrass musician, or Rhiannon is a jazz musician, or Rhiannon is an opera star. But she's extremely versatile musically. She is a MacArthur Grant Genius winner, and she is the artistic director of the Silk Road Project. So, Rhiannon, we'd love it if you could join us. Hello, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm great, very excited. So,
Mhm.
I was watching your NPR Tiny Desk concert recently. I think it was just over a year ago that you got to do that. And you were switching songs, and I think you were switching to I'm on My Way, and you were doing and using an 1858 replica of a banjo. And you was just kind of talking off the cuff, but you said something that just really spoke to me. You said, I've always loved the banjo. It was only when I discovered this after having visited the Gambia and studied a pre-banjo instrument called the akonting that I found a way to access my ancestors with this instrument. And I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about that process and that kind of, I don't know if it was a moment of revelation or if it was a process of revelation, but I'd really love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was kind of an interesting sort of route for me, because I obviously went to Oberlin, I studied opera, and then I felt like I just remember thinking there's like a million sopranos who could sing this stuff as well or better than me. What am I bringing to this art form you know, that is something that is adding to the conversation? And when I discovered the banjo, I started answering that question for myself, like, what can I do that is not already being done a million times already? And specifically the history of the banjos. When I was surrounded by, I heard bluegrass and country and all this kind of stuff growing up, and the banjo was always a white instrument. And when I discovered the clawhammer style, like the old timey style of banjo, I was really drawn to it, and I didn't really know why. I just really loved it, and I was still kind of feeling like I had to sneak my way in into into the music. And then I discovered the history, of it being an African American instrument, and through that journey, I found a purpose, kind of a life's purpose, because I realized how, as I explored more African American music, American roots music, I really did feel like I had a line to my ancestors, and the banjo became that in a really interesting way. I went to Africa, because like just really basically just the story of the banjo, just in case people don't know. I just realized that I have sorry, that was my that's my vacuum cleaner. Anyway, um, just as a quick kind of overline, just in case people don't know, there were pre-banjo instrument, there were lute type gourd instruments all over Africa, particularly West Africa, and people were brought to the Caribbean in particular, and what we know of as the banjo sort of creolized, became the instrument that we in the Caribbean in the hands of African descendants of Africans and what became Afro-Caribbeans, African Americans, like, that was also a creation of a culture and identity, right? So those folks were brought up to the United States, and the banjo went with them. And it became a staple and one of the backbones of American music. But it didn't always look like it did when I grew up. So, I had gone to the Gambia and studied a pre-banjo instrument, discovered all the similarities, but then, you know, where I found my connection was actually in the an early style of the banjo itself. So just so that people can see, I have this is a modern instrument, but it's a lot closer to what the banjo would have looked like, say, in the 1700s. A gourd instrument, handmade, with the skin stretched over top, fretless, They were all fretless until the late 1800s. And just a really deep sound, much deeper, darker, lower sound. And then in the 1820s and 30s, that's the first time. So we're talking from the 16 whatevers to the 1820s and 30s. It's a Black instrument, full stop. That's it, and everybody knows that. And then in the 1820s and 30s, white folks start to pick it up and go, hey, this is cool. I want to play this. They make a couple of changes. So you see here, it moves from the gourd. It makes two movements. It goes from a gourd instrument, you see the back there, to a rim, right? So it goes from a gourd to a rim, and it goes from a homemade instrument to a commercial instrument. And that's a really important change. I'm not going to get into my lecture, but this is the banjo. Like this is more the banjo. This is a turn of the century banjo. This is more what I'd seen, but this is the one where I found my purpose, is this in-between banjo that still has Africa in it, but has been changed by European hands already. So it's in that halfway point, it's still fretless. And this is the instrument that was used by a lot of minstrels, because obviously this is also accompanying blackface minstrelsy. So there's a lot of layers with this banjo. So there's reclamation, it's just a beautiful instrument. And I found that this is the one where the songs that I've written based on slave narratives spoke to me through this instrument. This is a replica of a banjo from 1858. And it just, the sound of it was like, that was it. Because when I went to Africa, I was called Tubob when I was there, which is white person. And I realized how not African I am. I'm American, I'm African American, and there's so many aspects of Africa in our culture, like absolutely, like it's very, very strong, but that's not being in Africa, and I felt very alien there. I was with a group of white Americans, and I was this in between. I wasn't African. I wasn't white American. I was this kind of like, and for me, this banjo kind of goes along with that. It's neither nor. It's inhabiting these two different worlds at once, which is what American music is. American music finds these cracks, these sort of rubs, and that's where it thrives, is where it's multiple things kind of interacting and creating this new thing. So the banjo then became sort of, I feel like my reason for being.
That's such an amazing story. And it's so positively valenced, this neither nor part of multiracial identities. You ring true to me. I've traveled to Japan and China a few times, and I'm not Asian enough. I go there and they look at me and they don't quite really know what I am. And in America, I'm definitely, oh, you're Asian. I'm like, and
you get the old like, where are you from? No, originally. No, where are your parents from? No, originally.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my grandparents were all born here, but I just love how you take the power of that and switch it from neither nor to this is American. And this is what American music does, is it finds things in the cracks there. I wanted to ask, Rhiannon, are there particular songs or influences that remind you of your time at Oberlin?
It's really funny. There's this is a funny connection. A couple of things. One is that I was asked a few years ago to provide the music. This was back when these things still happened in a different way. There was the Mark Twain Comedy Award. They give it once a year. And this year they were giving it to Bill Murray. And the Kaminsky brothers asked me to come in and be the musical guest for this. And so with my true nerdy kind of way, I sort of thought about what I could do, and I had the banjo, and I know Mark Twain was a huge fan of minstrel music. And so I actually found two songs that spoke to Mark Twain. I was like, what's the Mark Twain Comedy Award? Hasn't anybody done this before? Evidently not. They were very happy with this, And so one of the songs that I did was The Boatman, which the first time I heard it was not with banjo, and it was not in a folk setting. It was actually at Oberlin Conservatory in my studio, and a man, well, man, now I guess we're all kind of boys and girls then, but a tenor sang it in my studio class, the Copland setting of it. I heard a boatman, and that's the first time I heard that song. Didn't know it was a minstrel song, and then I've come back to that history this way around, but I cannot play it. And I played it on the banjo for Bill Murray at the whatever, where we were, the Lincoln Center, wherever, some fancy place. And all I could think of was Kevin Moreno singing that song in my studio, and kind of realizing, nothing is wasted. Everything that we learn is going towards whatever it is that we're doing. But I love that, because my education at Oberlin comes back in these, unexpected ways and through different kind of layers of the things that I'm doing. But I do love that one. That was a fun moment.
That's awesome. Could you talk a little bit maybe about how you use your platform to address some social justice concerns that are important to you?
Well, my platform kind of developed along when I was working on the banjo, is because the first realization was, oh my gosh, this is actually a Black instrument first. I didn't know that. Then the next question is kind of what has defined the rest of my career, which is, why don't we know that? Right? Because in the answer to that, this is where I've gone, and you find white supremacy, you find divisions, you find, some of the basic stuff at the heart of what makes America, America, both the good and the bad. So in the banjo, you have the beautiful ways that music comes together, and the beautiful way that we come together through music and culture. And you also find the story of the people up here running the show who see that, and they figure out ways to split people apart, particularly working class Blacks and whites. That's been one of the main pillars of conflict and creation, in America. Obviously, there's loads of different people coming from different areas, but that's one pillar. There's several pillars, and that's one really important one that gets exploited, in different ways till we find where we are now, which is, very polarized. And, these fissures are deep, and they've gone back to the days of slavery, and they continue, and so music is one of those places where you can see it and you can talk about it in ways that are accessible to people. It's like you can visualize it, you can hear it, you can see, oh, okay, so they went in and invented fiddling conventions in the early 1900s, and then forbid Black people to enter, even though in some places the best fiddlers were Black, right? When you start seeing the story, the division into race records and hillbilly records, when you see these things being done, Henry Ford talking about, let's go back to the good old days of the barn dance, in an attempt to push back against the jungle music of blues and jazz, while he himself neglecting to say that most of those dance bands would have been Black back in the day, playing for square dances, So it's when you start seeing the cover up, you learn that it's part of a larger cover up. And then, so it becomes a tool to expose that, and just of course the music is just amazing. And for me, why I stayed positive is because you keep seeing people coming together. It's exposing the tools that drive them apart that we have to talk about. Coming together is easy. We got it covered. Like, we do it again and again and again,
So unity and truth. It's fascinating to me, especially in classical music, we whitewash a lot of the histories, and we're like, oh gosh, yes, there are lots of composers of color, and yes, this particular composer held these odious views. And it's you can still teach the music, you can still play the banjo, but just acknowledging that history and bringing it back and making it part of the narrative of the instrument, it's such a worthy cause. And I love how one of the side effects of that cause is people coming together. And I think that's terrific.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like none of this is anybody who's living's fault, right? And this is what people have to stop reacting so personally to things. I'm just like, this is what happened. We have to understand the structure. I'm not saying we got to cancel Handel, but we have to recognize that his music does not exist in a vacuum. None of these people exist in a vacuum. And the stuff that's happening during Mozart's time, there is horrific things happening in other parts of the world. Like we have to understand how all of this, what the money that goes into this edifice or this commission, where does it come from? And it's important to say it doesn't mean that we should never do the Hallelujah chorus again. It's just to say that we have to recognize that stuff is complicated. If the narrative is simple, it's wrong. Always. Like there is no simple narrative because we are not simple. Humans aren't simple. Human culture isn't simple. It hasn't been since group A split into group A and B moved from here to there. Like the drama begins then, but also the excitement begins because it's when the groups, move and affect and are affected. That's where the interesting things come from. But, beware the simple narrative.
Absolutely. The you've been working on a narrative that I'm really curious about, and it's your I think it's an opera project on Omar bin Said.
Mhm.
What could you tell us about him and what drew you to say yes to this project? Or was this your project that you pitched?
No, I hadn't heard of them, which is a stunning and astonishing since I'm from North Carolina. But no, the people from Spoleto approached me. I played with my band at Spoleto a few years, running, and said, "Would you be interested? Do you know this guy?" And I'm like, "What? Who? What? That's amazing! What?" Omar bin Said, who was a Quranic scholar from Senegal, was captured, sold into slavery, and spent 50 years an enslaved man in North Carolina and died before the Civil War. And he wrote his autobiography in Arabic, and it's the only such document that we have extant. And it's enormously important. He's enormously important. And the story of Islam in America is enormously important. It's never told. And there were between 20 and 30%. I think that's a conservative estimate of Africans brought to the New World were Muslim. So I think probably even might be even higher. I tend to not want to, I try to be conservative just in case my numbers are wrong, but it's still a lot. It's a lot. A quarter to a third, I think is what people say. And I was just like, this is an amazing story. And what I tend to do is I say yes if a lot of things align, and I don't, even if I don't know how to, I'm going to do it. If it ticks a lot of boxes, I say yes, and then I figure out how to do it afterwards. And that's what I did with this, with the opera. And I kind of quickly, they wanted me to work with the librettist, and I quickly said, why don't I write the libretto? I'm not quite regretting it yet, but I think it's okay. And let me work with the composer. So I'm the lead composer, but let me work with somebody who's not just transcribing, who knows how the orchestra works. And I was so fortunate. I reached out to Michael Abels, whose star is, supernovaing these days. So I'm glad I got to him when I did. But he did the score for Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie, and he's a classical composer, and he's been teaching composition in California. And I said, have you ever wanted to write an opera? And he's like, yeah. And he's the most amazing collaborator. So what I'm doing is I'm writing all the music on banjo, and you said viola. I've kind of switched from violin to viola because I love the viola more. So I'm playing, it's just like, I am not even going to tour with my fiddle anymore. I'm transferring everything to the viola. I'm cross tuning it and just playing fiddle music on the viola. I love it so much. But anyway, and I'm just, piano, whatever instrument I have, and then I send it to him, and he is translating that, sometimes just straight up translating it for orchestra, sometimes composing descant, sometimes, there's a few pieces that he's just written. But most of the time he's taking my mathematical material and then just, and so I hear it and it's like, oh, if I could do that, that's what I would have done. That's ridiculous. Like, it's like, how did I luck out? I don't know. But it's cool because what we decided to do was, it's maybe a longer answer than you wanted. What we decided to do is, instead of putting non-Western instruments in the orchestra and making it difficult to replicate, we decided to treat the orchestra basically like a banjo. Right. So I'm, all the motives and it's repetitive, it's rhythmical in a way that it's not usually in an orchestral, instrument, like treating it as an instrument. And it's just amazing. Like what I feel like it's a real true fusion of folk and classical in a way that I think, only he and I could have come up with. And he's just been amazing to work with. So, that's been a great experience. So I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I collaborate, and that's kind of I think that's my superpower more than anything else that I do is collaborating, and figuring out who's the right person to collaborate with.
That's a really difficult skill, actually, figuring out who to collaborate with. Speaking as a woman of color, you get asked to do lots of stuff. What you said, oh, it checks off enough check boxes for me. I'll say yes and figure out how to make it work. Can you articulate what some of your boxes are that need to be checked off?
A story that needs to be highlighted. Feeling that I can bring something unique to it. That why me rather than a million other composers? Well, I feel like I could do something important with this story. If it's in the realm of possibility, it's not a 90-minute long instrumental piece for vibraphone. I mean, I can't do that. Right. So those are the main things, and it has to be something I think I could contribute in a way that's important, or I know who to get, to help me get to that point.
That's great. Thank you. So we have a question here from Eva Paddock, and Eva has admired you for a long time, and she is asking whether when you were at Oberlin, did you feel a dissonance between the music you were studying and the music you wanted to be making? And what did you do with that? How did you reconcile it, or how did you reconcile it? And about balance, staying true to yourself as an artist while you're in a conservatory program.
Well, when I was in conservatory, I wanted to be an opera singer. So there wasn't any conflict for me. I didn't study folk music. I mean, the irony doesn't escape me. I didn't pick up fiddle or banjo till I was 25, well after Oberlin. So 23, 25, whatever. I was like a few years out. And I of course, as a Black singer, the group of us that was there, I mean, you always feel a bit like, why, what you feel that conflict of, this is like dead white Western music, how do we find ourselves in this, and why? And of course, now I know there's this long history of African Americans in the music, of African, African, Franco-African, Anglo, whatever the hyphens are. I mean, there's, we've been involved in this in different ways. And if you go back far enough, there's also a back and forth between South America and African inflected music in South America affecting the Renaissance and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of really interesting stories in that. Those aren't the things we get taught. I didn't get taught any of that at Oberlin. There was like one book of African-American composer, like excerpts. I remember I had that, and I did spirituals, and I did Margaret Bonds. And so there was that strain, and then, I started contra dancing, because there's a local dance. And then I had to stop doing that because I was doing the operas, but I didn't feel like it was a conflict. It was more like, oh, I can't do that anymore. This is what I want to do. I want to be a soprano. I want to, die gracefully on stage singing high Q sharps for the rest of my life. Like, that's what I wanted to do. Later, after Oberlin, when I discovered the banjo, and I still loved singing classical music, and I was doing they kind of culminated. I did Susanna at UNCG, and I choreographed and taught the square dance. And, that was kind of peak. What am I doing, in that moment? And I had started playing Celtic music, and I was really kind of out of my mind a little bit with what do I want to do? And I was doing like 6 different things and still doing a full-time job. And I remember thinking, whatever takes off, I'm just going to follow that. because I love doing all of these things. And the Carolina Chocolate Drops formed, and then that was it. So, I think we have to find the happy medium between doing what we love, because we can find ways to love lots of different things, if the center part of it is true to ourselves, but also what is our duty in the world? Like what is the way that we can help the most? You know what I mean? And I feel like we have to have a relationship. Those two things have to have a relationship. Just because I wanted to sing Violetta doesn't mean that was what I needed to be doing. Just like let go of the whole point of whether I could get the roles or any of that kind of stuff. But like I found a way to tell a story that hadn't been told through something like the banjo that, was presented to me. So I think the universe presents you things that feed you if you're open to them being outside of that story that you tell yourself about what you want to do. And as soon as I let go of opera and embraced the banjo, now 20 years after I graduated, I'm hosting an opera podcast and I'm going to do my first role as an opera singer. It was supposed to be this month, but you know what I mean? It's like, you don't know what that journey is going to be, but you have to follow not only your own inclination, but also what is it that you can do for society, with that. And I really think that sometimes that gets lost. And it's this idea of, well, we're artists and we should be able to do whatever kind of art we want. And it's like, well, okay, but like, what is the connection then to making the world a better place? Not just because somebody heard a beautiful note, but like, you know what I mean? I had this conversation with Yo-Yo Ma when I was recording the song I did on the Silk Road, Calling Me Home, I think, or Sing Me Home. And I had never really talked to him. I only met him that day. And we just fell into this conversation. And he told me this really great story of like, he'd been playing cello since he was this old, right? And was well known since then, like had the world at his feet. And he got to a certain age and realized that he had to choose playing the cello. He hadn't chosen it. Like that's what he did. He played cello because that's what he did. So he had this moment of epiphany. It's like, I have to choose this. And then what do I want to do with it? And, you can really see in his career, he's the connection to making the world a better place, the connection to social justice, connecting to people, connection to art can, benefit communities in very positive healing. All this kind of stuff has really blossomed. It's not just about him playing the Haydn cello concerto, at fancy halls. It's like, he feels like he is doing something with his music, right? So that was a really big kind of realization for me. I was like, oh, wow, somebody like that who can do whatever he wants, you know what I mean, has to have this conversation with himself. We all do, no matter what level we're at.
So we've got two more questions right now. From Kenji, probably a quickish one also. What has been one of your most rewarding collaborations? And you talked a little bit about your collaboration on the opera. Are there other ones? Well, they're all rewarding, or else I don't think you'd be doing them. So do you have other favorite ones?
Yeah, I mean, working with Silk Road was amazing. That was like a really intense short one, My current partner, musical partner, is like, that's been a really rewarding experience for me. He's kind of opened me up, Francesco Teresi. He's really opened me up to a whole host of, maqams and different ways of thinking about music and different instruments. And he's kind of got an encyclopedic knowledge of different, non-Western traditions. And that's been really, I've learned so much. And I feel like, it's the sky's the limit there. So that's been a really incredible. Obviously the Chocolate Drops, we created a foundation, I think, for a lot of folks, which is amazing. It's amazing to see now younger folks who are kind of like, yeah, I heard you guys, it's just like, oh my God. So yeah, I've been very lucky in who I've worked with.
It's so much fun to have inspirational collaborators. It really makes the world a better place. So this is a great question, a complicated one. Would you have any advice for a white person involved with primarily Black music as to how to contend with the sort of racist or white supremacist background of white musicians in this area? So we're thinking kind of specifically for Will here in terms of jazz music. He has a hard time reconciling his positionality there as he's composing jazz music. So, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, firstly, I would say that no music is pure. So I think there's a way into everything for everybody. I think the main thing is I've been asked a lot. I've done teaching workshops and I've taught like spirituals and work songs and white people, mostly white people in the class, how can I sing spiritual? How do I find my way? And I'm just like, well, I think the best way to engage with problematic music, which ultimately all of it is. Early country music's problematic. Minstrel music is really problematic, which means our folk music's problematic because most of our folk music is based on minstrel music. Jazz is problematic. Blues is problematic. It's all problematic because our country's problematic. So I think the best way to be engaged with that is to be educated about the surrounding, what was going on around the foundation of this music, what was going on with the transformation of it, how how a music sort of goes along. You have the early period and the this and the bebop and the whatever. What is happening socially, like culturally, socially, what is happening, and to be educated about that. And then the other thing, I think it's two main tenets. One is to be educated about what's going on around, and two is to be grounded in yourself. The more grounded you are in why you want to make this music, who you are making this music, what your own personal connection to your history is, and where you sit within the history, I think leads you to how you feel within it. So like when I think about singing Gaelic music, for example, the music that Gaelic speakers in the islands and highlands of Scotland, that's not my tradition, but I'm confident in my tradition and that I'm a visitor in that tradition, and that I've made that tradition. I've brought pieces of that into me and put pieces of me into that. You know what I mean? Like by doing it in a way that's authentic to myself. And I've studied and I've been there and I've, studied with native speakers and I've learned some Gaelic and I know the history of the region. It takes time, is the bottom line. I think it takes time. And you have to consider it as not just a discipline that you're learning musically, but a cultural piece of history to know. I just think the more that you know about that, the more connected you'll be to the music, the more you're going to be able to be like, if somebody challenges you, be like, well, this was this and this is why. And I'm writing this because, you know what I mean? Hopefully that was helpful.
Absolutely. So I think we have time for two more questions. So I can't get everyone's questions in here, but I thought I'd ask this one from Sarah or Saria Brown. She says she's never heard of minstrel music before you mentioned it, and she went and did a quick little research about it, trying to learn about it, and a lot of blackface appeared. Mm-hmm. Would you describe it in your own words? How would you present it as?
Minstrelsy, it's important that there are different aspects of minstrelsy. So what you have at the heart is the music. When you talk about the music is a cross-cultural collaborative creolization of different cultures that's coming together as what we call American music. A lot of that is African innovated, European translated, whatever. There's this interesting kind of back and forth that goes along with this music, and it becomes the base of everything that follows, right? And you have the black string band being this huge, and they're disseminating, and then you get minstrels. And so what happens is that marries this nascent sort of musical tradition that's happening. It marries that with this dramatic tradition that has roots all the way back in Europe, and becomes this sort of working class mask work and way of making sure that the Black person stays in a certain position. So it's horrific. So the theatrical aspect of blackface and minstrelsy is awful, and you see it in movies. Still, I mean, it's still here. It's gone underground, pops out. It's way more out there than people even think, and it's also in all the other English colonies around the world. So, what I've been trying to do is engage with the music, because that is an important musicological connection to what we were doing and where American music comes from. So when you engage with minstrelsy, you have to be able to separate those two things and know how they work together, but you have to be able to look at one and the other. Otherwise, you just get so caught up in the blackface, and it's hard because I'm digging through this stuff and I'm digging through the lyrics, and it's a good reminder of how awful we can be. And then the music is a reminder of how amazing. It's a weird thing, but I just feel like being able to be dispassionate about it, in terms of being able to pull that music out and look at it and kind of go, okay, so what can we learn from this? And because it's a part of all of our DNA, it's a part of American music DNA. So
Thank you. That's a lovely way to deal with it, I think. Great last question from Ella Kauser. Ella says, I'm writing a short biography about you for the African American Women Intellectuals Project within the History Design Lab at Oberlin. And she reassures us that she's not trying to get you to do her homework for her. But how often do we get to do this? What parts of your work and past would you want featured?
parts of my work. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think that the most interesting thing about my story is the fact that everything's connected, you know, and that my ability, my position as a mixed person, as a Southerner, as a country and city person, as a classical and vernacular, and folk. I learned in the conservatory, and I learned at the feet of an old fiddler, and learned all by ear, for years. So as my position as somebody who can see both, has allowed me to recognize things coming my way that lead me in the direction I want to go, just not in the way that I thought, you know. And so my work with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, hopefully my work now with the Silk Road Ensemble, the solo work that I've done with, highlighting slave narratives in the way, through the banjo. And then coming back to full circle, engaging with the operatic world and being a part of that, and showing that, we separate things. They don't need to be separated. Yeah. And classical and vernacular are a lot closer than they are apart. And, so I just think that part of my story is the thing that I'm proudest of, that I'm trying to tell these stories in a way that show we are more alike than we are different. And ultimately, I think that's the message that I always want to get across.
Well, thank you so much, Rhiannon Giddens. This has been a treat for all of us. I know that you were slated to open the Artist Recital Series this year on September 11th, and I really hope that we get to see you next fall at the opening of the recital series, if we can get that to work out. It'd be really, really wonderful to have lunch with you in person instead of over Zoom. But yeah, I know. But even lunch over Zoom is pretty awesome. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants who came. Rhiannon and I are going to exit now, and thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Bye bye.
I know friend lay on his dying bed, held my hand to his bony breast, and he whispered low as I bent my head, oh, they're calling me home. They're calling me home. My time is come to sail away. I know you'd love for me to stay, but I miss my friends of yesterday. Oh, they're calling me home. They're calling me home. I know you'll remember me when I'm gone. Remember my stories, remember my songs. I'll leave them on earth, sweet traces of gold. Oh, they're calling me home. They're calling me home. So friends, gather round and bid me goodbye. My body's bound, but my soul will fly. A little light shining from the sky. Oh, they're calling me home. They're calling me home. My time is come to sail away. I know you'd love for me to stay, but I miss my friends of yesterday. Oh, they're calling me home. They're calling me home. Hey everybody. Hi Oberlin. This is Rhiannon Giddens and Francesco Teresi, who just is putting down his accordion. We wanted to start with that song. It's a really powerful song by Alice Gerrard, who lives in North Carolina, which is one of the first ladies of bluegrass, she and Hazel Dickens, and she wrote that song some time ago, and it's always really struck me deeply, and never so more as this year. And so what we're kind of contemplating at this moment in time is all the death that we've been surrounded by this year in so many different ways, but you know, what follows death is rebirth. And so as we look forward into the new year and start thinking about how life is going to look, hopefully next year, very different than this year, we can only hope. But just kind of, that's the way it always works, is that, you know, rebirth always has to follow death. And so, you know, we've just been contemplating that a lot. And so that song really has been wanting to be played, I guess. So the next piece we're going to do is just a couple of tunes. It's just nice to contemplate also with no words. So this is called The Cliffs of Moher and Sleep Soon Night of Morning. We are in Ireland after all, so we have to throw in an Irish tune now and again. Cliffs of Moher being one of the most beautiful places in Ireland. Oops. me not being able to hold my bow very well. Love that tune. Love both of those tunes. The second tune is actually from the Shetland Islands, so it's north of Scotland. So they've got really, really cool tunes up there. So gonna get the blood to calm down a little bit now. I went to Oberlin, gosh, many years ago. I don't want to say how many. And I got started in the classical world, obviously, because I was there for the conservatory. And I learned a lot of Western classical art music. I didn't learn a lot of Renaissance and Baroque music, though, because that was one class that I didn't take, unfortunately. And so in meeting Francesco who is quite versed in a lot of that music. I've learned a lot, and I mean, not a fraction of what he knows, but he went to conservatory in the Netherlands, and yeah,
Studied Baroque banjo.
yeah, studied
I
Baroque
didn't.
banjo. You're going to be teaching that class, though. I have a feeling.
Baroque banjo.
Yeah, he's creating a new style. So this is yeah. You should talk
Well,
about
it's
this song.
it's a song from the early 17th century by Claudio Monteverdi. In those days, where little classical songs could sound very often like popular music. The two things were very interconnected. So it's a little pretty tune, which could be, in fairness, written yesterday. It's a little pop song. We call it. It's a song called Si dolce il tormento.
And it's, it's just one of those heartbreaky kind of songs. So
Wasn't really intended for the cello banjo, but this is our version. Maybe not.
si dolce il tormento che in seno mi sta, ch'io vivo contento per crura beltà. Nel ciel di bellezza s'accreschi fierezza e manchi pietà, che sempre qual scoglio all'onda d'orgoglio mia fede sarà. La speme fallace rivolgami il pied, di letto né pace non scendano a me, e l'empia c'adoro mi nieghi ristoro di buona mercé. Tra doglia infinita, tra speme tradita, vivrà la mia fe. Se fiamma d'amore giammai non sentì, quel rigido core che il cor mi rapì, si nega pietate la cruda beltate che l'alma invaghi. Ben fia che dolente, pentita e languente, sospiri mundi. Well, we think it works. It's amazing to hear how things have changed in music and how things haven't changed, and those patterns that we keep being drawn to over the centuries. And it's really nice to be able to kind of engage with some of this music in a slightly different way, but still using all of the years that we trained in that world, and then kind of bringing it into the folk, more of the folk world, since there's such a close relationship to classical music and folk music. I mean, it's so far away from each other right now, but like it wasn't always that way, and there's so much borrowing, you know, that the classical world does from the folk world. So it's just it's nice to kind of bring them together in a real kind of natural way. So, but we're gonna head to the folk world completely now with this next tune. We do live in Ireland, as I mentioned. We're coming to you right now from right outside of Dublin. But this next tune I learned from a lilter from Cavan, which is more of the center part of the country. And he and his mother lilted together. There's some recordings of them. He's quite, you know, I don't even know if he's still around. I have to find that out. Because he wasn't a spring chicken when I sat with him, but he's a lovely, lovely fellow. And in this kind of way of complicating the narrative of tradition, you know, there's this idea that traditions are unchanged for hundreds and hundreds and you know of years, and the fact is that they do change, and they're affected, and you know are affecting things. So like Irish traditional music was injected with a huge boost from the recordings of the 1920s and 30s of Irish Americans that came back to Ireland. So he learned a lot of tunes from records, actually, a long time ago. So anyway, it's just really interesting how these things happen. But I've learned this from his singing, and we're going to put a little extra different tradition to it with what Francesco's playing.
I'm playing some techniques from the Sicilian tamburello, which is the traditional frame drum of Italy, the tambourine. I always thought that the jig and the tarantella, especially the way they play it in Sicily, which is quite slow, were a good fit. So this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little diddle 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 diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little diddle diddle diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little diddle diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little dumpledy diary da da little dumpledy diddle 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 dumple diddle 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 dumple diddle 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 dumple diddle 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 dumple diddle 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 dumple diddle dum diddle diddle dumple diddle diddle dumple diddle 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 dor diddle diddle dumple diddle dum diddle little dumple diddle 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 diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little diddle 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 diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little diddle diddle diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little dumple dum diddle little diddle diddle diary diddle little dumple diary diddle little dumpledy day day little dumpledy diddle 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 little diddle little dumpledy little dumpledy diddle little diddle dumpledy little dumpledy little diddle little dumpledy little little dumpledy little little dumpledy diddle dum diddle little dumpledy diddle 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 dor diddle dor diddle little dumpledy day day little dumpledy diddle. So people often ask me, what do you take away from your training at Oberlin? And that's definitely one thing that I take is my breath control. So I learned how to breathe with my wonderful voice teacher, Marlene Rosen, and that has definitely stood me in good stead for all of my musical career. But I learned lots of other things from her, but that's been one of the foundations to anything that comes after that, anything that comes after my college years with my breathing and stuff. So it's one of the things I'm really grateful for, because I've been able to apply it to different things. So here's a little bit of blues for you. This is an early style of blues. It was recorded by Little Hat Jones in the 20s, I think. And it's, there's different kinds of blues. We're all kind of know about the sort of Robert Johnson, sort of lone older man with a guitar and a slide maybe, and kind of, doing that kind of blues. But I am really drawn to the earlier stuff. It's a little bit more it occupies a space in between sort of that kind of lonesome sound and sort of the popular songs of the day, and sort of it's an interesting kind of in between, and I really like it. So Francesco's put it on his version of the banjo, so which was also used as a blues instrument, especially in the early years. So before the guitar took over, the banjo was the thing. So this is our version of this. Well, it's bye, bye, sweet baby, baby, bye, bye. Well, it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. Well, if I never see you anymore, may God bless you wherever you go. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. Well, I'm leaving, sweet baby, can't carry you. Well, I'm leaving, sweet baby, don't you wanna go? Well, if I never see you anymore, may God bless you wherever you go. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. Well, I tried to tell my sweet papa, but he didn't understand. Well, I tried to tell my sweet papa, but he didn't understand. Well, I tried to tell my sweet papa, but he just did not understand. Now he'll realize the trouble now that I've found another man. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. Well, if I never see you anymore, may God bless you wherever you go. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. And it's bye, bye, pretty baby, baby, bye, bye. Yeah. Well, we have just a couple more for you. So this one is actually the newest song for me, because I wrote this summer during, I will say, all the upheaval, because the upheaval continues, in American society. It was very, very out there for a while this year. And I've been singing about it and talking about it for years and years and years, the deep inequities in the American system and how they've come from, directly from being built on slavery and genocide. But it was just hard. I was kind of here in Ireland. I haven't been home since January, and just didn't know what to do. And so this song came out because I just got really frustrated. Like, what do you want? I don't know. I wrote this song and then I recorded it, did a video with Yo-Yo Ma, and put that out there. And, you just kind of go as an artist, what do you do? What can you do? And you just do what you can, basically, is the answer. And so now this is kind of part of my show and our show and my just thoughts about everything. So it's called Build a House. But it starts off with a tune written down in the 1700s. It's some of the earliest notation of African American music in the New World, or of African music in the New World. But, at that point they were becoming something new. But this is written down in the early 1700s, and there's a little tune in front of the song called Coromanti, which I've sort of adapted a little bit. long. I learned your words and wrote my song and put my story down. But then you came and took my song, took my song, took my song. But then you came and took my song, claimed it for your own. I took my bucket, lowered it down, lowered it down, lowered it down. I took my bucket, lowered it down, the well will never run dry. You brought me here to build a house, build a house, build a house. You brought me here to build a house, and I will not be moved. No, I shall not be moved. No, I shall not be, I shall not be, I shall not be moved. So we're gonna do one more song for you. It's not just about dealing with all the things that have been going on. It's also thriving from them. I mean, it's kind of a weird concept, but you know, when you've gone through a dark time, like I mentioned in the beginning, that's the best opportunity to bring some joy into the situation, because you really need it. And you know it's joy because you've been down in the depths, you know, and you need those two things for life, really. We have them both, and we have to embrace both of them, but we can't stay in the darkness. We have to come to the light, and we have to find that life. And that's something that African American culture has been particularly good at, because we kind of had to. And so I know that's something that people draw from it, and we're going to end on a couple of pieces from Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who was the godmother of rock and roll, a huge influence, genius guitar player, and fabulous gospel singer, and all around personality. So, but just to say thank you. These are not the easiest things to do. We miss having an audience so much, and but we've kind of learned to know that you are there. Whenever you watch this, you're there, and so we sing and play to you as you listen to it right now, and that has brought some measure of comfort to us in our place here, so far away. So yeah. Look down that lonesome road before you travel on. Look up, oh, look up and greet your maker before Gabriel blows his horn. Where he told such a load gone down that lonesome road. Look down that lonesome road before you travel on. above my head, I hear singing in the air. Up above my head, I hear singing in the air. And I really do believe there's a heaven somewhere. All in my home, I hear music in the air. All in my home, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. And I really do believe there's a heaven somewhere. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. And I really do believe there's a feeling somewhere. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. And I really do believe there's a heaven somewhere. I said I really do believe there's a heaven somewhere.